So yeah, my name is Teresa Neumann. I am on staff here at Kerr. Welcome to our last Friday morning seminar of the semester. We're going to hear from some alumni of Kerr who were graduate fellows over the course of, I think we span most of Kerr's lifetime actually. So that we will be thorough. It'll be good. So now I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves. So we have Amy, Asma, and Sophia. So if you could each, in that order, tell us, introduce yourselves with when you were at Kerr, what programs you did here at Loyola, like what your graduate program was, and then just 2 quick sentences about what you're currently up to. So Amy, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Sure. So I'm Amy Kerr. I was trying to remember, I think I was here 2004 to 2006 or 7, some span there. My program was the Applied Social Psych program. That's where I got my doctorate. And then my 2 sentences, I'm currently a director of evaluation at Professional Data Analysts. And I oversee a number of evaluation contracts. We do external evaluation consulting.
Thank you. All right, Asma, go ahead.
Great. So I'm Asma Ali. I am, I was in the 1997 to 1999 cohort. I think, yeah, it may have, yeah, I think that those are the dates. But back a long time ago, let's just say that. So, who we are, where we are, what we're doing currently, right? A couple of sentences. So currently, since Kerr, since it's been a while, I have done a number of things in philanthropy, with teaching, with nonprofits. I ended up leaving Loyola with my master's degree and worked in philanthropy and research, various research firms in Chicago for several years, and then went and got my PhD from UIC in urban planning. I am currently a specialist master is the track. It's an individual contributor role at I can't say the word. It's a big consulting firm starting with a D. I was forbidden from saying the firm because they do work with Loyola, but starts with a D. Sounds sort of French. But mostly I work on federal government, philanthropy, and like municipal, regional government types of projects. So still very much nonprofit consulting, higher ed, which is sort of where I spent my whole career. So that's what I'm doing lately.
Great, thank you. Sophia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Rodriguez. I am currently an assistant professor of urban education at the University of Maryland. I think I started working with Kerr kind of secretly in 2010-ish, maybe 11, and then through 2014 when I graduated. I was part of the Cultural and Educational Policy Studies PhD program at Loyola Chicago, and I've heard it since has unfortunately gone down the toilet, so that's really sad. But I primarily identified as a sociologist of education, and I worked with a number of folks in the sociology department also. The work I do now is sort of kind of traditional faculty work, research, teaching, and service. And involved in a number of research projects that I'll hopefully share a little bit more about in the next set of questions. But it's great to see everyone.
Great, thank you all. So yeah, I think we just want to kind of start with, and we'll go in a different order this time. What brought you to Kerr? Like, how did you hear about us? What attracted you? Did you have any idea what you're getting yourself into when you signed up to come be a graduate fellow with us? Yeah, Asma, maybe you can start.
Yeah. So I came to Kerr fresh off of a year of AmeriCorps in Chicago. I worked with Public Allies, which has since gotten some play for various reasons, but Michelle Obama was the executive director. It was her last year as executive director when I was there. And she So I had been doing some work in the community because of Public Allies. It's an apprenticeship program. It is fantastic between undergrad and grad. It still exists. So if folks are looking for something to do that's still community-based and even has some research stuff, they're a great organization. I had been working with Chinese mutual aid and street level youth media as an ally, and worked with somebody who happened to be a partner of Curl. I was also a little bit desperate because I had 1 year of AmeriCorps funding when I came into grad school, and I was like, I'll kind of figure it out from there. So I ended up helping on some Curl projects when I first came in. People directed me to Phil Knighton, and I talked to him, and he was like, oh, we don't necessarily have something for you, but do you want to help out? So I did for a semester. And then they had a conference, which was actually maybe not traditional research, but it was a great way to get in touch with people that were doing traditional research all over the city. So it was just such a wonderful opportunity to sort of meet everybody that did community-based work or community-based policy work. So I was the fellow RA. I worked for PREG technically, which is was a predecessor to Curl that eventually folded because all the universities sort of started having their own version of Curl. So I worked on that conference for the majority of my time and then helped out on other people's projects. Curl was just so much in line with kind of where I was coming from and sort of the direction, community-based research at Public Allies. They emphasize sort of wisdom in the community and sort of wisdom of lived experience and, incorporating that into programming. And I think by the time I was done with Public Allies, I realized that direct service, though I really appreciate the people that can do it, really wasn't my forte, right? I kind of get too involved, right? So I've tried to go back every once in a while, and I always end up just kind of falling into the stories. So policy and sort of research is a good way for me to contribute, and Curl really fostered the skills needed to do that. So I kind of spent a year doing, working with communities and bringing in community insights and asset-based community development, and then came to Curl where I really, expanded that skill set, developed some real skills as opposed to, just going out and talking to people. So that was sort of how I came. It fell right in line. And I think as I think back, like sort of thinking about your values is really important in your career. I mean, they talk a lot about it now, like back 20 years ago, no one talked about it. They were like, just get a job. Hopefully it's good paying, right? Like you'll be fine. But alignment with values is really important. And so if you value sort of community or you come up in community, and that's the thing, finding a way to incorporate it is really important, I think, and Curl really allows you to do that.
Thanks. Let's see. Let's go with Amy. Let's hear what brought you to Curl.
So I think it was similar, like to Asma in that I, part of it was I was looking for funding, and my advisor thought it would be a good fit. And so I was like, okay, I'll go and check it out. And what had brought me to grad school was just, I loved research. That's always, is just something I loved, but I really wanted to apply it. That was just, I knew that from very early on. I wanted it to be applied, useful. And so Curl, like when I got there, it really opened my eyes to what that would look like. And I think it was one of those things where I didn't know what to seek out, and I didn't know what I wanted or needed to do, but Curl ended up being that place that taught me how you could use research and evaluation and do it in a way that was respectful to community, respectful to the information, and so I learned a lot of skills Well, I was there in terms of evaluation, just how to run things, how to, qualitative work, quantitative work, all of the kind of the hard skills. And I think something that I still use to this day is those, I don't love the term, but like that softer skills in the client and community work, because you don't really get taught that as much in your graduate education. And it's such a huge part, especially in my job where I do evaluation consulting. I feel like I got that from Curl. And learned how to do it in a respectful way, that I don't think a lot of you get in a lot of other spaces or places. So I think that really is what, I didn't know what I was seeking out, but those are the things that I found at Curl that I think have made it really valuable to me, that I've brought out throughout the rest of my career, which mostly has been in consulting, but I've done another number of other jobs in philanthropy and nonprofit, and usually with kind of a researchy evaluation kind of tint to it. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. And Sophia.
Yeah, similar, I think, to the others. So prior to coming to grad school for my PhD, I was a teacher. I taught in New York City public schools and Chicago public schools. And I really wanted to stay connected to communities that I had worked with over the years. And I was struggling a little bit in I think it was my second year of my doc program, but the first year was a struggle because I was feeling like research was, kind of conducted over here in the academy, and then communities were living their experiences in the actual world. And I was questioning whether or not, I should stay in my doctoral program and things like that at the time. And I took a qualitative methods class, and my professor for that class was like, "Oh, have you heard of Curl? I have a good colleague over there." And so she just kind of recommended that I reach out to David. And also at the time, Curl's offices were in the downtown campus where I had my GA ship. And so I would see these like fun communal like people working together. And I was like, why are we not doing that? Like our work was very isolated as graduate assistants, and everybody sort of did their own research agenda. And that's sort of what I was getting out of my program at the time. So I sort of blindly reached out to David, and he was like, well, let's have a conversation, and it sort of started like that. We just sort of kept in touch for a few months, and would chat about my interests in community-based organizations in particular. And so that was initially just, he was like, we don't have any like assistantships or things like that. And I didn't actually need one because I had one, but I wanted to be in a community of researchers, applied researchers, people who were thinking about, and kind of like, I think Amy, you said, like, I didn't have the language for all this at the time, right? I didn't know exactly what I needed or that this kind of enterprise existed, because it was pretty different from the researchers that I worked with in my program. So in any case, that sort of led me to, stalk Curl's website a little bit more and see the type of work they were doing and things like that. So initially it was coming from a place of wanting to make sure there were other ways that I could engage with communities, and work with people that had, I think, to your point, Asma, like the values that I was bringing that, again, I didn't necessarily know were really the central component of why I was in grad school. And so I think that was something that I was like affirmed, and in feeling that. And I can't say enough about David. And then I met Christine, of course, and seeing that researchers could do sort of ethical community-based work, and be explicit about that, was something that I thought was really awesome. So that was sort of initially what led me to Curl.
Great. Yeah. And I didn't mention at the beginning, I was also a graduate fellow here, and did overlap, Sophia, with some of your time. And it's just always interesting to me. Thank you all for answering this question, like what brought everyone here. And it's always kind of like easy. I had a very like clear. I had done participatory action research. I wanted to do more of it. I heard Kerr was doing this kind of stuff. I said, okay, I'll go to Loyola and get my master's degree so I can get more letters behind my name so that I can do this and someone will pay me to do this. And then meeting Phil, I think is also often Phil, David, or Christine is like the other entry into Kerr. And yeah, I really can also relate to the values, that was so much of, the people being most affected by issues, being able to participate in the whole research process was also something that really, really drew me, and it sounds like a lot of you all too, to this sort of like unique, unfortunately more unique maybe than we all wish that it was, research model that Kerr is really quite good at this point. So speaking of research, let's hear about what y'all did while you were here. And Sophia, why don't you start? You had kind of mentioned that you were, like a fellow traveler, but tell us a little bit more about like the Kerr-based research that you were engaged in.
Yeah, so I started at the time. Kerr was funded by the McCormick Foundation, and it was an early childhood project, which was not necessarily my background, but one thing that I got to learn a lot about. So I think there were 11 or 12 community-based organizations in Chicago that were partnered through this grant funding or whatever it was, this foundation funding. And essentially I worked with David to sort of bring those leaders together of those organizations. And so it was sort of like their sense making around policies that were related to early childhood, and also like learning how to share across the different organizations, because they were all fairly neighborhood based and had their own kind of mission and populations that they worked with. But I think the point at the time was to sort of bring them together as leaders in this like particular space, and Kerr was that space for them. And so, there was someone I remember from Albany Park that I got to know. And I think in the past, many of the partners had also done other projects with Kerr too. So that's how I actually got to know one of the executive directors for an organization that would then become part of my dissertation. And so that McCormick project was kind of the main thing that I worked on. And then eventually, as I started to partner with the organization for my dissertation, we sort of brought that project to Kerr, and I worked with students there as well.
That's also a very common theme that graduate research fellows were able to use Kerr research as part of their dissertation, which, yeah, Amy, what did you get to use Kerr as part of your dissertation while you were here?
No, I didn't. I was at the VA at the time I was doing my dissertation. So I used that data. But while I was at Kerr, the first thing I did was the Illinois Community Technology Fund evaluation. And it was an interesting one because I think the money came like two companies merged and they gave out a bunch of money to help bridge the digital divide. And then at the end, they were like, oh yeah, you were supposed to do an evaluation, which, we've all been in that situation where you're like, oh, well, that would have been good to know before and build it in, but here we are. And it ended up being a wonderful project to work on because it really was helpful to learn how do you take a situation like that and turn it into something useful. So then it became more of a focus on, we worked closely with, I'm forgetting his name now, Michael. So it was a leader in the digital divide kind of in Illinois, and it talked with a bunch of different community members. And so the product was ultimately something for kind of them and the community to help continue to advocate for digital divide funding. And, there was some talk about like the work that was done. So we got to go all over the state of Illinois and, do interviews and figure out, what did they use, what helped. But then, like I said, the ultimate goal was, I think it was used like to help go to legislature, and a couple other things too. Like I said, it's been a while, so some of the memory's a little rusty, but that was one of my main projects coming in. And then I also worked on the early childhood education project lightly. So that one sounded familiar as you were talking. And then towards the end of my time at Curl, I started with Christine doing the homelessness, graying and homelessness. Is that the title? So homelessness over 50. And that was wonderful. We got, went out into the community, and then I ended up leaving about, I think it was towards the beginning of it. And another fellow took over that position. So those are the three that I remember. And I know there were other pieces that I contributed to while I was there. But those were, I think, were the big ones that left big impressions on me.
Yeah, that's pretty common. I think all the fellows on the call right now can be like, oh yeah, I've jumped to a whole bunch of different projects. And do I remember exactly what I did on all of them? No, but yeah, that's part and parcel. Absolutely. Thank you. And then Asma, can we hear a little bit more about, I know you did
Sure.
talk a little bit about it in the intro, but a little bit more about
Yeah,
what you did.
well, I mean, there was the conference, and actually, as others were talking, I actually started on, it was a small project for organizations of the Northeast, and it was focus groups with youth, and that was always an interest of mine in particular. Like, that's why I went into a PhD program, was to try to understand how you collect information from youth and other populations that aren't, just regular able-bodied adults that, like, do that. So like, how do you amplify those voices and make sure they're heard across research? So I remember that it was interesting. I remember, like, at some point we were trying to bring 5-year-olds into the room, 5 or 6, like early elementary school kids, and they kept wandering off. So we had to figure out like how to keep them engaged. And I was like, oh, you can't run a focus group with 5-year-olds. You have to collect information from them another way, right? So I think one of the themes, right, like I talked a little bit about like the conference, which like was a super valuable experience, right? Though I think at the time I was like, well, I'm not doing research. Is that important, right? Like, or do I want to do research? But I'm really glad that I was able to, benefit from being a fellow like in that position. Like, I met so many people that ended up being like future collaborators that I ran into again, like years later, like that helped me get into grad school years later, like for my PhD. So I think, Curl just offers such a wealth of different possibilities, like jumping into projects and helping out, like that's not the way traditional researchers work, right? Like in my PhD, I always heard be more focused, which meant sit down and look at your data and don't talk to anybody, and that's just not really like how I function, right? I don't think well when I'm in a room by myself, right? Like, I think well in tandem with other people. And of course you do have to look at data and analyze it, I get that, but like the conversation and the dynamics of having other people to talk to about your information, about verifying it with your participants, about sort of being like intimately involved, right? Like, is a strength in community-based research. I mean, there are streams of evaluation and research that say that is not enough objectivity or whatever. I love that Curl embraces that. In fact, I ended up working on my PhD. So just in terms of relationships, like 10 years after I was at Curl, I ended up being mentored at UIC. I mean, I still do work with her, with Yolanda Suarez Balcazar, who at the time used to be a professor at Loyola and then moved over to UIC. I ended up working on a NIH Schneider grant with her at UIC. She still mentors me, right? Like, to this day, like so that relationship and is good. I mean, you find a community at Curl, right? Like, and I think you find a community even across cohorts with people you haven't met. Like Yasmin and I like ran into each other with something else, and we're just like, oh, we were both Curl fellows. Like, what are you working on now? Oh, we should collaborate on something, right? so there's like having that group of like-minded people in that community is so important. And it really embodies what we like, the communities we work in, right? And how we view them. So it makes sense that sort of we do research that way, and Curl attracts people who kind of believe that research should be done that way and connect with that. So gosh, there's just so many I mean, I can't say enough good things, right? There's just so much that comes out of being part of that community. And, I mean, like lifelong friendships, right? Like I'm still in touch with co-fellows that are, dear friends still, right? And so, yeah, like there's so much, like if you just make yourself open to things, right? Because for a minute when I got my fellowship, I was like, yeah, this is organizing a conference, it's event planning, that's not why I went to grad school, yakety schmackety, right? But I'm really, really glad that I did it, and there were other opportunities, and the conference was such a wonderful experience. Yeah, I would say that's been sort of a theme throughout my career, right? Like go in spaces you might not know, and I never would have thought, like if you had asked me this like even 2 years ago, I would have never ever been like, I'll be working at Times. So we're just very different people. So but just that openness is really important, I think, both during your Curl experience and then even after, right? You never know what connections, what opportunities, like where things will take you.
Yeah, Asma, I think you hit on a lot of the things that were part of my next question of like what makes Curl unique. No, that's fantastic. So yeah, does anybody else want to kind of jump in on that like unique aspect of Curl, right? That kind of community, or if you found that other places and then maybe we're not as unique as we think we are, there's some other aspect of us that makes us unique. But yeah, from Amy and Sophia, like from your experiences, like how's Curl been different than other, research realms you've been part of?
I think there's two things that I noticed pretty immediately, which is just sort of like the non-hierarchical nature of Curl I felt was different for me, coming out of being a graduate, or kind of parallel experience of being a graduate assistant in my program. So I think like there's no assumption that a senior person knows more than an undergraduate fellow. I think people were sort of welcomed into the process in a way that I hadn't observed before. And I try to do that now in my own collaborative research teams. The benefits of seeing like multiple skills and multiple perspectives from that experience to me is really unique. And I try to do that in my current work and life. I think the other thing that was unique was kind of, I don't know, there's often like such a focus on the traditional like pathway of academia that, you have your own research agenda, you execute it, you might collaborate in certain ways, but you're supposed to kind of be leading the charge on things. I just also went up for tenure, so this is like fresh in my mind about all the things I had to prove, quote unquote. And, to be honest, like collaboration and community engaged work is like not really as valued as some of the other sort of benchmarks that you have to hit for tenure process in particular. And so for me, seeing really talented like scholars use their skills to help like in the real world and help in communities, whether that's with organizations or other, I think is really unique. And I think continues to be, it's weird. I'm at Maryland now and there's nothing like Curl here, and it's just interesting to me. I'm sure there are Curls elsewhere at other universities, but none that I've worked with in the same sort of capacity. I think the other thing that for me was unique was seeing, I know there were a lot of evaluations going on, and that tended to be a way to help organizations also. And that was something I ended up doing with the organization that I worked with for my dissertation. But I think the focus, at least from what I took away from working with David all those years, just the focus on relationships rather than sort of products and outcomes. And, I think that was something that I struggled with too, because even though I wanted that during my grad school, I could still feel the tension of like, but we have to do this. We should do that. We should tell them how to do this. And David was like, nope, we're actually just going to listen and we're just going to, have conversations. And I was like, but that doesn't feel like we're doing anything, and I think he helped me sort of understand, just again, to come back to those values, and that it was okay to do that too. And that was something that for me is unique. And I try to impart with my students. But I think academia sort of pushes us to be individualistic in a lot of ways. So I think those three things kind of are at the top for me with its uniqueness.
And I think people have covered pretty well what I also think what is unique. And I just want to reiterate that I think it's the collaboration, the level of collaboration and the genuine collaboration, not just for show, that really stands out. That, I've worked in academia, I work in like a for-profit consulting firm right now. And, I've worked in a lot of different spaces. And I do think that's been the thing that kind of sticks through. And then I think that, like you were saying, Sophia, it's that relationship first. That I think is still like you have to teach people in all the jobs that I've been in, that really matters, gaining that trust and the focus on like building the trust with whichever group you're working with. I think that's like just a core of Curl that you don't see everywhere. I feel like you have to really convince people of it outside of
Well,
Curl.
and to piggyback on that, right? Community-based work and the kinds of things Curl has done for a really long time, and even has different methods of approaching and, a way to do it. Like a lot of people are saying that they do community-based work right now, right? Right? Like a lot of people are trying to get into community-based work right now. And without that core, right? Like I'm in a very business MBA mindset type of environment. Like, even though I'm in the government practice and there's people in government there and like that, it's the stop and listen part of like just what people are saying and absorb that and, really come back and think about how that applies to your work and what you're planning with them. And if it really makes sense to them, right? Like the whole whole utilization focused evaluation, like lots of people are talking about it now, but Curl did that like 20 years ago before Michael Quinn Patton wrote his book, right? Like, I mean, it was like, if it doesn't make sense, people won't use it, right? Like it has to make sense to the people who are actually going to utilize it, not just the researchers, right? Like that's another realm. And yeah, you can find time for that collaboration. And then when you're thinking of business, right? People are like, this is the business process we just designed, because I'm an individual contributor, like a program for small businesses, like in community-based settings, right? Some of them are really huge small businesses. Some of them are small mom and pop shops. At the time I was at Curl, there was a project around childcare stuff, like the state of Illinois was funding childcare. So there was a consortium that was trying to put together, how do you support like women that want to do in-home daycare, or men, I guess, but it was mostly women. Like the number of people who just come in and they're like multi-channel marketing, digital marketing, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, this is an organization with like 10 people that has like an annual revenue of under $100,000. Like, yes, it's important to let them know, but you've also got to take people kind of where they're at and then like sort of present ideas and, see what makes sense to them, right? Like you can't just it's not always about the glossy stuff that you show like Ford Motor Company and Apple, right? Like, because like you can lose people there too, right? Like, and then like the whole thing doesn't move forward. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but the whole idea that you listen to people and there's a lot of groups that say they do that, right? And a lot of things about like DEI and cultural responsiveness and all of that stuff that's been integrated, I feel, into Kerr's work since the beginning, because you take time to listen to people, like even though you didn't call it culturally responsive or you didn't call it DEI, there's a component of that in there, right? And so many people say they're doing it and they just really miss the mark. Like I'm in projects all the time now where I'm like, hey, like, do you actually want to go to the participants and ask, like, you know, like, should we actually like, you know, think about this? And I work on like one of my projects is for a federal agency that does like disaster management, right? Like, and it's like underrepresented communities, but then no one wants to actually talk to them and they don't respond to the survey, right? So like even just pushing that needle on integration is something that is so just not how people think, I think, in general. And like the advantages of Kerr is you do that. And you also learn how to translate between people who aren't on that page and people who are very effectively. I think like that's been like a place I've been in like since I left Kerr, where it's like, hey, how do you advocate for this, right? Or like, how do you translate into like designing a survey what people are saying about their experience or things like that. So I think there are, I mean, it's not just all the soft stuff. Like sometimes people are like, oh, that's just the soft skills. Like anybody can pick those up. It's really not that. I see Amy shaking her head. Like I mean, there are skills, like hard skills involved in that you really get to practice and kind of refine at Kerr and at a very like early stage in your career. So I mean, yeah, it's wonderful.
About this, it's been a little while, and Christine, feel
Yeah.
free to jump in. We actually kind of wrote something up when we talked about our scrappy Kerr model, because we actually had a community partner who called us scrappy, and then it was almost like, I don't mean to be insulted. We were like, oh no, that's a badge of honor. We think that that's fantastic. You know, because it's about that being responsive and being agile and meeting people where they're at, and like being able to work with partners who, you know, other maybe more traditional research-based universities in Chicago, who I won't name, are less likely to want to engage with. And it doesn't seem like something that they can be as adaptive. And I think that that's something that I've seen with my time at Kerr that we're actually like really good at. And it's
while
small things
producing
too.
high quality stuff, right? Like that's the thing, right? And like now those universities who will not be named, right, like say they're doing this work, but the approach is very different, or it's very, I mean, translational research, like as a whole concept, like why does it have to be a thing, right? Like why doesn't it make sense that people know their bodies and know like what's good for their health and figure out how it works without 7 translators in between it, right? Like, so yeah.
You know, when you were when you were talking, I thought of a slogan that came out of what you said, which is soft skills are hard.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and
Yeah.
I mean that you know, not that they're actually the core of everything that's going on. I just want to say that, and I know Teresa especially. I came to the academy as an organizer. I mean, that I had, you know, that has been my career for most of my life. And so many of the things we're talking about are really organizing skills and empowerment skills. And I think that's, I mean, to me, that's an underlying sort of value that we have. And it's coming from such a different place than traditional academia. And so I think, and then there's a slogan for an organization, for a network of organizations that we are not so much a part of anymore, but are in Europe mainly, and are again this concept of science shops. but it's called, democratizing knowledge. And I think, again, I mean, this is my ideological, theoretical bent on all of this. I mean, it seems to me that's what we're talking about, and that's what we value. It's our methodology in a lot of ways.
Yes, completely.
So again, you all have been really great at answering a lot of these questions. And I want to open it up for everybody else to ask some questions, but I want to just kind of one of my last questions is what kind of advice do you all have for current fellows, for current graduate students at Loyola, for current undergraduate students at Loyola, for people who are interested in what we do, like who are already in it, perhaps? Like, what would you say would be like lessons learned that you hoped that someone had said to you at this point in your Loyola career?
I would say take a minute and I've done this very recently and it changes over time, so you can come back to it, but take a minute and sit down and identify your values that are important to you. Like, what is it about Curl, that or your experience in grad school or whatever it is, like, what are those like core things that drive you? Because jobs come and go, opportunities come and go, people come and go, right? Like, but I think where I've run into trouble in my career is where I've deviated from core values because like I wanted the money, because I wanted, because I really wanted to work with somebody, right? Like who ended up not being aligned, right? So not to say that there aren't reasons, but to make sure it's clear to you and to revisit it, right? Because it changes as your life changes, as you have children, like sometimes things come up, right? Like as you move into different kinds of positions and roles, your values may change. And sometimes it's really hard because you just get stuck in the race, right? Like I have to get tenure, I have to get the next position, I have to get the next promotion, I have to, I want to be a good parent and sort of do well at my career, and sort of figuring out what those values are and what you're not willing to compromise on, I think is really important. So, I mean, it'll be important as you transition from college to your first career. Like, where is the point you walk out? And if an organization's mission aligns with yours, but it's really toxic and the staff don't like really look at it the same way, right? Do you walk away? Do you stick it out, right? Because I think all of us come to places like Curl because we want to do good, right? Like, and we want to be in positions where we feel like we're having an impact on people and their lives, as opposed to, just doing what we do, right? Like you can go do data analysis in a lot of places now. Like it's a sexy job, right? I think the growth is like 23% for the next 10 years or something like. So if you're doing data in any sense, you'll have a job like for the near future, but like, really thinking about those values and what you're willing to, what you're willing to do and not do is I think important. On a semi-regular basis. That and being open, which I talked about earlier, right? Like, don't always be like, 10 years ago, I would have said I will never work a corporate job. Like I did it once early in my career. I hated it. I wasn't going to go back. But it could have been the position, it could have been whatever, but being open at the same time, like to new experiences and, new people and new situations, I think is important too.
And I think something that's always been helpful to me is like envisioning what I want my life to look like, which I do think that comes into, you're bringing your values into that. And I always looked at people I admired and said, is that what I want it to look like? Is that what I want it to look like? And I knew, some of those hardcore RL1 researchers, I admired them so much, but I saw what their lifestyle was. And as much as like some, that competitive, like ambitious part of me, like was like, oh, I really want to try to do that. I was like, I will not be a happy human being. And I think you really have to listen to your heart, and just sit and, like Asma said, I mean, that reflection is so important. And so think of what you want your life to look like, which means your day-to-day life, which means like, are you living your values? And look to the models around you to see like, what do you like that people are doing? And then, I think Asma summed it up, being open. I mean, I've tried a number of different positions in a number of different areas, and they all gave me things and taught me things that I wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't done them. And I didn't always stay at them for a long time, but it wasn't a perfect path. It wasn't something where I drew out a dotted line, like I do this to go to this next step. But because I did each, I learned things about myself. I learned things about the field. I learned about different, content areas that led to the position I'm in now, which is a really nice fit for who I am and where my life is. And then, I still do that reflection. Is this where I want to be? Is this what I want my life to look like? And so I think to really take a step back, if you love the academic life, that's awesome. But also, and because I know at least when I was in my program, there was a lot of pressure to be in that academic life. And I think I had to really feel strongly about it to be able to step away from it and to do something a little different. And then I have other colleagues who love it, did the path, and are very happy. So it's, looking into yourself and thinking what you need and you want. And this is a nice time to do it because you have time to play around and to try different things too.
Yeah, I would say I'm the traditional kind of, I guess, path in this context. And I've had to fight a lot, to kind of stay here and be here. I'm first gen, and I didn't have, a lot of experiences or models coming into grad school. And then especially kind of working with communities and community-based research, it wasn't sort of privileged by some of the more traditional elitist academic people that I encountered. But I guess for me, the advice I would give, and what I sort of tried to do when I was at Kerr, was to just, treat everyone you meet as kind of a teacher in the process. And, I'm definitely, that's like an orientation, I think, of mine. I try to be like a sponge to what I'm learning. And I think I was really affirmed that I could do the kind of work in academia and I've made compromises, of course, along the way. Because there's certain things that you just have to do. And I try to tell my students that too, there's the work that we do to get tenure and to get our funding, but then, how that plays out in communities is sort of where I see the impact. So I think just being a learner and positioning yourself as, not above anyone else, in the process is something that goes a long way. I think other people mentioned this too, and it came out a little in the earlier questions. I think, with my students, they work on a lot of different research projects, and sometimes I think that's really jarring for them. And I try to not be like that, but I think at Kerr, you take opportunities to learn and listen from different types of research, different types of perspectives. Because ultimately, how you end up, wherever you end up, you're going to be able to use the things that you learned, and being adaptive and flexible in that process is something, and reliable, I think. Those are things that, again, you can't necessarily teach. And I think with my students, I see that in that spirit of collaboration, like working with other people toward a common goal, like that is stuff that for me was really valuable at Kerr. And I'm a pretty strong-minded person, right? I kind of think, I know how things should go, and I was wrong a lot. And I think having that experience as a student was really important for me to think about now, where and I just talked to David earlier this week for advice on some of the projects I'm working on, and how I'm managing my student research team and things like that, because it's an evolving process. And so if you kind of take that perspective as a student, I think it's going to help in whatever context you end up in as well.
I mean, it's good life advice too,
Yeah.
Sophia. Like, I mean, I think someone told me at some point, right? Like, you're never going to find, just like you're never going to find a spouse or that's 100% everything you need, right? Like, you'll still have girlfriends you go to for things, or, you know, everyone has their strengths. Like, a little bit of what Sophia was saying, like, mentorship is the same way, right? Like, one of my mentors is a guy who was a Chicago cop who ended up being like the chief diversity officer for Missouri, or the director of the Office of Diversity for the state of Missouri. Had a weird, you know, background, but is very different from me, right? Like, he's not like Southside Chicago cop, right? Like, he's like maybe like point by point, if you went down our characteristics, he's the opposite, right? But but sometimes, and we learn this at Curl, right? Like, mentorship and collaboration can come from people who come from different backgrounds than you, and that's having multiple perspectives from people who think differently than you is always helpful, I think, right? Like, just seeing different angles of things. Like, when I have job changes, I talk to a number of people and they're all different. Some of them are academic, like I'll call Yolanda up and then I'll call up the guy who's the cop, right? Like, it's very different perspectives and often different than how I'm looking at it, but it is a way to figure out how to move forward, right? Like, if you're stuck or if you're trying to figure out how to navigate something, it's very helpful.
So I have asked a lot of questions. I want to open it up and see if anybody else has some questions for our panel. I do have a couple more in reserve, but I do want to let other folks have the field to talk.
I mean, feel free to ask anything. Like, well, maybe not anything, but like,
Okay, so another question that I did have for you all was, what is, and I didn't put this in the email, so this is a surprise question. Favorite memories. And I don't care how random they are or how idiosyncratic they are, but any favorite memories from Curl while you were here?
I have two. One is professional and one is not. I don't know. This is being recorded, so maybe I will not share the not professional one, but honestly, my favorite memory is being able to just walk into an office and like chat about something, a dilemma, a frustration, something related to what we're doing. That sense of community and solidarity was just always there. And I know Julie couldn't be here today, and I was sad about that because Julie was I think she was a couple years ahead of me. And I just adore her, and she's so smart and so helpful. And there were times where I would just pop in and be like, can I just dump something on you? And she was like ready to support and talk it through, but never in a way that was like, made me feel like, I don't know, never patronizing or anything like that. I just think the way that people enter into conversation there sort of just transcends all the levels and layers. And so that is probably, and I've done it obviously the number of tears in David's office, and the times I wanted to quit, and he's like, look, you are finishing this degree, so I think those are sort of the things that really stick out. Of course I learned a ton about research, but I think just the way people interact there is something that is really special for me. And then the food, I think there was always food, and that was a great memory as well.
amazing.
So unfortunately, we have not had food in a while because of COVID. So our current fellows have not benefited from this thing that you referred to about how well we fed everybody. We're hoping to bring that back soon, but
Oh man, like pancakes and grilled cheeses.
Oh, they were wonderful.
Yeah.
I do believe the griddle's hiding in a drawer here. I think it's still on the premises, but no, we haven't.
Oh, it
pulled
got
it.
much better. We only had bagels back in my day.
Yeah, I think
Bagels
ours-
and the Swedish
Well,
bakery.
bagels were
Yeah.
something that were continuous.
Oh, okay.
The lifespan of, I sometimes think if you did a symbol of curl, you might have a bagel and cream cheese there.
Oh my God, yes. I
Swedish
used to have
bakery, which
multiple
I
on
heard
Fridays.
closed. Like, I think it was at Phil. Somebody used to always bring cookies from the Swedish bakery.
The
We had a
Swedish
lot
bakery
of
did
Swedish
close.
bakery too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
So I'll
the-
say one
oh,
of my, oh, go ahead, Amy.
No, you can,
I
Asma.
know. I was just saying, so there's a lot of memories of food and just, you're right, the accessibility of talking to anybody was, I mean, that's really special, especially when you're in a closed door pandemic kind of place now, where you have to set up an appointment to talk to anyone. But one of my favorite memories actually was during I don't know, they used to have like sort of receptions for various things. My husband and I still talk about this because I remember talking to him about it, but it was with Cale Williams. And we were sitting around after we were sitting around at this reception, and it happened to be with like a person from sort of a big foundation, right? Like a VP of programs or something like that. And, he starts talking, and, Kale's like, well, I'm a senior scholar, but.
Oh dear, we lost Asma. All right, hopefully she'll be rejoining us.
My internet went out for a minute. Sorry.
Oh
about
yeah,
that.
we heard.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
last thing we heard from you is you're sitting, there's a foundation person, and
Yeah. So
Gail
there
said
was
I'm a
this
senior scholar.
foundation, and Cale Williams was a senior scholar. He used to do a lot of projects, particularly around housing in those days. But he was known in his career for having led this fair housing organization, the Leadership Communities of what is it? The Leadership Council of
Metropolitan Chicago. I think.
Metropolitan Chicago, which did fair housing. It was a really well-known organization. He was semi-retired from it at that point, or maybe fully retired when he came to Curl. But so in this conversation, Cale goes, oh, I ran this nonprofit. And the guy like definitely was picturing a small community-based organization, right? And, Cale just kind of said, yeah, I ran it. Now I do projects around here. Very unassuming, very Cale. At some point, somebody comes over and like addresses Cale by name, and you could see the person's face because it was like an organization that he majorly funded. Like he didn't realize Cale was the Cale that was the executive director, and Cale just like took it and that was just sort of, that to me like kind of embodied the kind of person I want to be, right? Like like Cale lived his values, and he's since passed. For those of you who did not know him, he was wonderful, like many people at Curl. But hours in his office too. Like I spent hours in his office just chatting with him, it was just. He had done all this great work. He knew all these people, but it was just so unassuming and just part of who he was. And he was so authentic. And like that moment, like I remember going like, this is the kind of person I want to be, right? Like I want to be able to have done this good work and just know that it, but not need to talk about it or like blah, blah, blah. But it was just so funny to watch the guy's face. And I just sat there like, just going okay. but it clicked, and then he was like, oh you're Cale Williams, right? Like, and he was like, yeah, I'm Cale. Like, yeah, that's just something that I remember, like, even years later, because it was just so, like, it embodied Kale, but it also embodied kind of how a lot of people around Curl function. Like, you do your thing, you talk to communities, but it's not really about you as the researcher. It's really about helping people get where they need to go or want to go. And so, yeah, that was sort of one of my memories. There's lots that involve food too. Here, like both at Curl and like in other places with Curl people. So, yeah.
I think my favorite memory is kind of about like Curl being full of good people too. And I think this kind of embodies how Curl like saw people as more than just like fellows that worked or and that it wasn't hierarchical. So I came to Curl grad school right out of undergrad. I had never been to New York City. And I was working on the early childhood education project, and they took all the child care owners to New York to go to a conference. We got to see the Harlan's Children's Zone, like lots of really cool things. Well, on the last day, there was some meeting or something that was happening, and David, and it was Aparna Sharma was running it at the time. They knew I had never been to New York. And out of the kindness of their heart, they let me take a couple hours off to just like walk around New York. There was no reason for them to do it. I'm sure they had to do extra work in order for me to be able to just go walk around, and it just always struck me as like, one, it was awesome. I'd never been to New York. But two, it's a memory I go back to a lot now that I like oversee teams, that, you give people these experiences and you treat them with respect and as whole people. And like, not only is it just like more pleasant to work in that environment, but like you're really changing their lives in ways that they probably don't even realize. I doubt that's a core memory for David or Aparna, who's passed now. But yeah, that was just something has always stuck with me, and that I think really symbolized kind of the goodness and the heart of Curl.
Okay, those just made me really happy. Thank you for sharing those memories. And yeah, I can speak to some of those too. I got brought on as a staff person as I was still finishing my thesis for my master's program. And David, of course, was like, you'll just owe us hours. Don't worry about it. Get that, what does he always call them? Like your very long book report, like get that done. And then like, it's fine. And like that saved me. That was such a huge, generous thing where I'm sure, again, Amy, like you said, I'm sure that cost him a little bit of like work that he needed to do, but it wasn't that big of a, but like just giving me that space to be a person, to not like, to get that done and like know how to meet people where they're at. I think that that's also something that I really have loved about being here, is that, just the supportive atmosphere, which is so much deeper than just a supportive atmosphere, and the sense of community. And Curl fellows who are currently on, again, I am sorry that we haven't been able to feed you as well as previous generations. We really just haven't. And, hopefully we will before the end of the semester, but, that's something that like that food and fellowship, I think also goes so far, a long way. And the other thing I wanted to say was, just, jumping off of what everyone else has said, like I talk about our currency at Curl is relationships, and also I want to thank you all for being like good stewards of that previous to us. Like that's really important. Like that's why we can still do what we do, is because you all that came before us were good stewards of relationships with community partners, with funders, with other researchers, with like other departments, the whole thing, like all the interdisciplinary, all the collective, all the everything. Phil talks about a collective CV that we all have, that's like really important. So, I mean, I just want to thank you for being those relationships prior to us so that we could continue those relationships today, because, you know, without the relationships and without the trust, you know, we really would not be able to continue the way we still do. And I also know that that is like a huge part, because we have the consistency. You know, Christine's been here for a minute, right, Christine? David's
Yeah.
been here. Yeah. And
I
that's
mean, one of the
huge
things
too.
that I really cheer, I mean, is that there's such a diversity of people, there's a diversity of ages, and it's all flat relationships. You know, there's, you know, I mean, and yeah, it's like a neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a good, I like, that's an interesting, you haven't used that analogy yet, Christine. I haven't heard that one from you.
It just came to my mind.
Yeah, so is anybody, any other comments or thoughts from any of our current fellows? I don't want to call you by name. I'm not going to do that, but I'm tempted. I'm just going to say that out loud.
I guess just a thought, it's just cool to see how consistent the atmosphere at Curl has been through the years. And like, you know, coming in last year, it felt so countercultural and such a unique environment, but it's cool to see how consistent that's been from its inception. And thank you all for your time and sharing about your experience.
I think it's also just so impressive to see like the longevity of this organization, like the work that y'all are talking about, like not to make you feel old, but like this was happening before I was born. And like now I'm a fellow here. And like that is just wild to me that like this work has been going on for so long, and it really shows like what a pioneer Curl was in this field of collaborative research. And it's really exciting too to think about like what will come in the next generations of fellows and researchers that this organization works with. So yeah, echoing Casey, thank you all for being here and sharing.
Like I told the panel before we get started, no one's ever been upset with us for ending early. But before I wrap it up, I do want to ask if anybody has any other questions and or panel, any final thoughts, reflections, comments.
I'll just say, like, sort of for Christine's neighborhood analogy, Yasmin and I have done some work recently, which I have to say, like you keep coming back to Curl. I think those maybe it's more because I'm in Chicago, but you know, you see other fellows, you like connect with them. But what I appreciate, right? So the most recent work I've done that Yasmin and I have like presented on together, even though we have different projects with similar community, is related to my faith, which I wasn't in touch with for a really long time for various reasons. And it kind of feels a little full circle in a nice way to come back to it and come back to it with opportunities with like a current Curl staffer, right? Like, it feels sort of like coming home, right? Like in a way, right? Like, so those connections exist. So, I mean, I just want to say thank you to Yasmin, particularly for the work that we've done together. And it was presentations on similar projects, but it's been a good way to kind of round out and reflect, which I think is an important thing that you learn to do at Curl, or, you know, like around the time you're at Curl, right, professionally, that not everyone does, like, and that I think has always been shocking to me when people that are academics are not self-reflective and thoughtful about the work and the impact it's having on them, not just on their research matter. But yeah, so thank you, Yasmin, for like, you know, being a part of that journey with me, because it's been very meaningful to me personally, as well as we got a couple of presentations and stuff out of it. So, so yeah.
I would just say that I'm always trying to find ways to come back. I ask David usually every 3 or 4 months, and I even tell him I have my own money. So it's I think it's just special and I miss it a lot. And it's weird to kind of be the big kid now doing projects because I always had people to kind of look up to or, you know, observe how they were doing things. But yeah, just enjoy your time there because it's not probably going, you're going to be the part that you carry, whatever you carry with you will be utilized in your whatever context you go into. But I don't know that, you know, we ever get back to that kind of spirit of collaboration in that same way. So just thanks for organizing us, and I was happy to talk, or if I can answer questions, I'm happy to share my email too if people have questions as they move forward.
Yeah, same here. I'm happy to talk, and like everybody said, soak up your time. You're gonna carry these sorts of memories with you your whole career.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. This has been, I'm gonna say this is probably gonna be the highlight of my day. So I really appreciate you all taking the time to talk with us and everything. And yes, we should all, I wish we had bagels for everybody that I could send you virtually. That would be fantastic. But yeah, again, Amy, Sophia, Asma, thank you so much. Asma, I want to chat with you because we actually have a lot in common. My husband worked with Yolanda's husband, and
did
I
he?
was an organizer at ONE before I came here. So
Oh, yes, definitely. We
So-
should connect. I may even know him because I've floated around their Center for Capacity Building for a long time. So if he was placed there, I might.
he was over with Fabricio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with Fabricio and Yolanda both.
Yeah,
So
yeah, his name's
talk.
Sean. His name's Sean. Yeah, anyway, so
Yeah.
we should talk.
Yeah, we should connect.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a very Curl moment of, oh yeah, we all have to, you know, look at all these things we have in common. I love it. Christine, this probably happens to you like twice a day. So anyway, thank you all.
But this has given me a lot of spirit. I mean, it strengthened the feeling of place, and it made me feel that we got to get out of Zoom. I mean, I just want to say that. But I mean, I like Zoom because it allows us to connect over geographic distances, but I don't like the rest.
Yeah, and the bagels are so much harder on Zoom. So
Yeah, virtual
right.
bagels just don't make it.
Well, thank you all very much. And we're happy to stay on a little bit longer if anybody wants to ask some follow-up questions, because I know we have time. But yeah, that concludes it. And this is our last seminar for the semester. I will let you all know when we've got the next ones coming up, starting in late January. So until then, thank you all for being here, and thank you again to our presenters, and we will see you in the new year.